Hello, my name is Andrew Stewart and I'm the Acting Deputy Director of HR, and I'm here to give some training on application and interview skills going forward. Right. So ground rules for what I'm about to present is that this is being video to share with staff as required. So as I said before, normally this would be a safe space training, but as I say, this will be shared wider. But questions are welcomed. I can't see the chat at the moment, so Carol or Alice, could I ask that you raise that with me if there are any questions being asked of me that I'm missing? Okay. So the aim of this session is so that you know where to apply for NHS and KGH jobs, help you build some confidence in how to apply for jobs, and give you some tips on how to make your application stand out, help build confidence in being interviewed, and gives you some tips on how to make the best impression at interview. So, and we will revisit this at the end so that we can make sure that I've achieved all those aims set out now. So, the first thing to talk about is where to apply. The main one where all NHS jobs are you can apply for is jobs.nhs.uk. This is where every single trust posts their vacancies, and other healthcare sector organisations do post some of their jobs as well. We do actually post our vacancies on KGH. Actually, you can get it via our KGH website rather than this. It's w.kgh.nhs working here, and there's a tick box where you do working here, and there's like a button on there that looks like a blue button, and you click it and it will show jobs by nursing and midwifery, medical and dental, health services, support service, and admin services. And then there's also a campaign that we're part of with Northamptonshire Healthcare Foundation Trust, Northampton General, and also St Andrews, which is called The Best of Both Worlds, which is Northamptonshire, which is about living and working in Northamptonshire, and it does a lot of tweeting as well as part of the work that we do. So that's where to go to apply for jobs. A lot of the majority are now online, so it's making sure that you do work have access to the internet, and make sure that if you don't have access to the internet or you need some support with that, you can use the library services, have computers that are bookable, or there are some in the training zone, in the actual staff zone within the trust. And also, in general, Google, and I use Google to search for jobs. If I'm interested, there's lots of different other websites that are out there, and I would just say Google is your friend in terms of job searching. That's the first place I'd go to search for jobs. The first thing to mention is that in terms of recruitment, we have a technical, well, it's not a technical term, it's an analogy about how to make yourself stand out. It is called in the recruitment biz a purple squirrel. Now, a purple squirrel is someone who has all the abilities and attributes, everything as a manager I would want to see in a job, and it's something that is, you know, you could start in a job and you hit the ground running. The thing to be clear about this is that purple squirrels do not exist. The whole point about this is that with any interview or application process, you will need some sort of development or understanding or even getting used to the role as part of this. So the interview and application processes are getting you as near to what the manager wants you to see, so that then you can then get into the role, so that you can get that development. So it's a bit like you try and make yourself as much like a purple squirrel as possible, so that you're everything they want in terms of the job interview, the job specification, you're answering the questions right, you're dressing like they want to see you as part of that. It's just so that they can see how you are within the process. But it's how do you do that without how do you stand out, and put your head above the other candidates that are applying as part of that. So the first and foremost thing is that you see a job that you absolutely love on one of the websites that I've talked about. You think, oh my goodness, that's the job for me. I want to apply for it. And And the biggest thing, a piece of advice I can give to you is apply for it. Half the time that people don't get jobs for applying for things is because they put it off themselves because they think, oh, I'm not good enough. I don't think I'd get that. And it's some of the psychological things that you need to break through as barriers to then say, right, well, I'm a big believer in you apply for the job, and if you get an interview, your application's brilliant. If you then don't get the job, it's about either about interview technique, or you weren't the right fit for the job as part of what they were looking for as part of it. But actually making an application is the first thing that you need to saying to yourself out loud, I am going to make this application, I am going to do it, I am good enough to do this. Some of that is about building yourself up to do it. So once you've done all that self-building and made sure that you feel confident in applying, what I would recommend is that you read through the advert and supporting documentation. That's really important because a lot of people just look at it, think, oh, I really like it, and then just click apply, and then don't really revisit it as part of it, and then use the standard application. Some of it, and what I would say to you is don't let what it says put you off applying for it, but you just need to read it to know what the manager is going to expect of you in the job. Check the deadline on the job, because often they will say that this is when the advert is going to close. And I would try and always do it earlier than the actual closing date. I know it's human habit to actually make an application, and if it says midnight on this date, you submit it at about 11:59 on the date, and you work up close to the deadline. It's really important to set yourself deadlines back from the deadline and to try and get it done as soon as possible. But the first thing I would do is that once you've read the job description, check the deadline, is actually contact the manager on the advert, so that you actually say, you can then say to them, I've looked at the job, I've read the job advert, I'm really interested. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the job and a little bit more about you and what it's like to work for you and how the team work as part of that, because part of it is building rapport with the interviewing manager. You may call them and think, oh my goodness, I don't want to work for them as part of that. And then that saves you time in terms of making the application as part of that. And then, so you can, it's about, people don't leave jobs, often they leave managers. And actually, if you're going for a new manager, it's about building those connections even before you've made that application as part of the process. And then, as I said before, actually make the application, because the part is that often people put themselves off to say, oh, after reading it and the manager, I'm not good enough. I would say 9 times out of 10, if you are good enough, it's just about the techniques and tips that you need to put into your application, that you just need to word it in a certain way to get the meaning out of it. And yeah, read the advert and supporting documentation before you do any of the contacting the manager or make the application, so it looks like you, well, so that you know what you're talking about. So the next step is actually making the application. Now, the first,
sorry, Andrew,
yep,
we asked 2 questions.
yep.
The first one is relating to your first slide. Is LinkedIn not another great platform for searching for jobs?
LinkedIn is a good platform for searching for good jobs. I would say that it's good to have your that is a really good point. LinkedIn is good. And often people look at CVs as part of that, but the NHS isn't. So looking for NHS jobs, it's not the best for NHS jobs. Which is what I'm specifically talking about here. If you're looking for other jobs, there are other platforms like Monster, Health Jobs UK, and there's loads of different other. If you're looking outside of the NHS, there's a wealth of other places to go, and that's why I'm saying Google's probably the best place to go, because that would search LinkedIn, it would search Monster, it would search NHS jobs, and it would probably give you a more well-rounded view as part of that. But it's a really good question. LinkedIn is quite good from that perspective.
Then the second question for this part, can contacting the manager also work against you if they decide they don't like you before the interview?
I've never heard that, if I'm honest with you. If you've it, because it's more, I know, I'd say that that doesn't work against you because it's more about you, because you should come away from that conversation, and when that conversation went well or that conversation didn't go well, and if you think, well, actually that conversation didn't go well, you should think about, well, is that the right job for me, given that would be my manager that I would be working for? Does that make sense?
Yes. So would you recommend that before you call the advertising manager, you have your the questions you want to ask already outlined, keeping it to addressing your immediate concerns or understanding of the role?
Yes, but I would make sure that you've actually read the job description and personal specification, because the manager will want to see, because what you're doing by contacting the manager is showing that you're going above and beyond. The best candidates are the ones that make the most amount of effort at the beginning of the process and make the most amount of time to engage in the process at the beginning. And also subconsciously, a manager will be saying, well, I spoke to that individual. Where's their application as part of the application process? Because it's an opportunity for you to sell yourself a little bit, to then say, actually, here's a little bit about me. Would this, do you think that would, would you be interested in me applying for it? And you can get some brutal feedback from that, but so be prepared for what they would say back to you. But it does give you a good sense check rather than putting all the effort into making an application, because an application can be quite soul destroying and takes a lot of time to do it well, if that makes sense.
Okay, there's another question around this that's just come through. Do
Yeah.
informal visits benefit a candidate, and is it allowed? Can you request an informal visit?
Yes, and yes, it would benefit as part of that. So it depends on what you're doing in terms of, I would say the first part is just getting some rapport with the manager, and if you want to test that out, it's whether you make the application. The informal visit may come at the point that you get an interview, to say, actually, could I have an informal visit before the interview to just have a look around the department? Or because what the a good interview process would also introduce you a little bit to the department as well. So there's something around, would they get, that may be a question to ask the manager, to then say, would you be able to do an informal visit, or is that part of the interview process? And then the manager will then confirm that back to you about when it's the best time to come and have a look and talk to the team. Does that
Thank you.
answer the question?
I believe it has. That's the last question that's been posted.
Thanks for picking that up, Carol. I really can't see the questions, but they're really, really good questions. So going so going back to the application, you've decided to make an application. Now, it may sound odd, but the hardest part of the application is actually the supporting statement, which comes last often within application process. It certainly comes last within the track and NHS jobs. My advice is to start with the supporting statement first, because actually the other stuff is fairly straightforward. It's just, what's your education, my name, those kind of things. But the supporting statement is often the most important piece of the application, and would give the most people the insight into what you're actually like to work with. So that it's reversing the application and going to the bottom and starting there first. And also with that is that actually you're often tired, you've completed the rest of the application, you think, oh, I'm just going to, and you're right at the end of the deadline, and actually you think, oh, I've just got to rush this supporting statement, and the supporting statement should be the bit that you take the most amount of time with as well. So what I'd also suggest is to save a Word document with all your supporting statements separate to the application, so you can save it outside NHS Jobs or Track systems. NHS Jobs and Track save your application for a year on the system in line with GDPR, so that if you then don't make a job, apply for a job within a year, you potentially could lose all that good information you submitted as part of it. So it's worth retaining that somewhere on a personal computer or your notes on your iPhone, so that you've got it wherever you need to be, but it's outside of both those systems. Using the personal specification to write a supporting statement. So within every job description, they should have a list of pre-requirements that will be looked at based on your interviews, based on the interview, the application. This would often be the qualifications, the experience, the understanding as part of the statements, and that's where I would look. And I've got an example of one to share after this. So the other thing is to potentially bullet point supporting statements against what you'd see within the personal specification, but the important bit is not to list. So when you're doing that, and I'm just going to, so when you're looking at when you're doing the supporting statement, you'll look at the personal specification and it'll say something along the lines, requires typing qualification to this level as part of that. And you'll think, I don't have that typing qualification. Oh, I'm not going to apply for this job. What I would say to you is then think about, well, I've worked in doing computers and I do typing as part of my job as part of it. So you say, I do not have this qualification, but I have equivalent experience in working, doing admin for the procurement department for 6 years, where this involves duties which include um, um, typing up invoices, sending it, and it's just expanding a bit more. So it's not so I do invoices. That's not the right example. You need to be a bit more. I don't want to use it. You need to be a bit more explanatory and give a little bit more information and actually say what is your role as part of it. Saying I do this doesn't really come across well within applications. You need to give a little bit more detail about what you do, how you do it, and how that impacts on you as part of the application process. Also, the first thing to do within this supporting statement is, or at the end, or both, is say, why do you want that job? What is it about that job that makes the difference? Often I find within applications on NHS jobs, people haven't tailored the application. I've had on occasion to say that they were applying for a job in Kettering General Hospital, and it said that the, Colchester Hospital, and they'd obviously done oh, I like that job, I'm just going to click and I'm not going to review my supporting statement. So managers do actually read what you put, and it's important to make sure that you've done it in the right way and make sure that you've put what is it about the specific role, because the manager wants to get excited by you and what you can bring to their role within their team. And if you can say that within the supporting statement, that goes a long way to getting the manager, oh yes, they've done a bit more than just write about their experience. They've said, what is it specifically? And I would say at Kettering, what is it specifically about the hospital you want to work for? And also, what is it about the specific job? And when I say about Kettering General Hospital, you don't put it's the closest hospital and therefore I get to walk to work every day. That's not the way to frame it. You say, well, actually, um, I've been treated at Kettering General Hospital, and I see the care that's being delivered at the hospital. I'm really engaged with the dedicated to excellence values that you have within the hospital, and I see that I can really make a real difference. And actually, some of it is about improving my work-life balance and my well-being, because I'd be able to walk to work as well. So you can say those things, but it's just saying a little bit more about it rather than I can just. It would mean that I could walk to work as part of it, because you'd be surprised how many people do say that sort of stuff within applications. and also try and keep it, whilst I'm saying expand a little bit, try and keep it simple. Don't use words that you don't understand, or use big words because they can trip you up a little bit. NHS jobs, I think is it just spell check the application. NHS jobs and track don't often allow you to spell check. That's why it's good to do it outside of NHS jobs in a Word document, because that would spell check it for you. And also getting someone to read your application for submission, because you cannot, I'm dyslexic, I always get someone to look over my application before I submit, because I can't spot my own mistakes. And that's really where it, and it, so that they can add something to it. And if you give them the personal specification, you can ask them, would you hire me based on that? And that's where you get some really good feedback as well. It's someone trusted who you can, I get my wife to read it for me, or I used to get my mum and dad to read it for me as part of it. And they get, it was quite difficult getting the feedback from them, but at least I'd got someone so it actually made sense and it read well, and so that the manager reading it back would get that good information. Any questions on making the application, Carol?
Yes.
Okay.
How long should the supporting statement be?
Um, as long as so I will go on to this bit here. So the application, what I would say is that you need to make sure that you have, within your supporting statement, you have covered every single point within the supporting statement, uh, because then and that then says, so for the NVQ level 2 here, for this is an application for a business level apprentice, say for instance. If you've done a bullet point with an expanded answer to then say either how you have that qualification, or you have equivalent experience in, and this is how you demonstrate it for both that, then I think that it can be as long as short as the supporting statement indicates. The more senior you are, or the more that's within the supporting state, and more that's within the personal specification, the longer I would expect your personal specification to be. Does that make sense? So, and there are some word limits on it within the system. So we're not expecting war and peace, because you don't really want to turn your the recruiting manager off in terms of what you're doing. But it's also making sure that you're to the point as well.
Will you be able to have available to everyone who's on this call an example of two great supporting statement letters?
I think what I've got is even better than that, is that the staff development team have offered to offer additional support to this. So if you have got you're about to make an application, you're unsure about that, they've offered to be able to support with reading your application and seeing what they can do to help. So but making sure that you've given yourself enough time. So if you're going to them the day before the deadline, I don't think that they'll be able to help. But if you go to them and go, right, I've written my application, it's due in a week's time, could you read through it for me as part of that, so that I can then, it's the right thing for me, then they will offer help and support for you and your own specific circumstances based on the job that you're going there. And what I'd say to anyone on this call as an additional offer, is that I'm happy, if you want to write a supporting statement, I'm happy to look at it for you as well.
Last question. If we contact learning and development, will they disclose to our current managers that we're applying for other roles?
No, because that would be a breach of trust and confidence, and potentially an information governance breach.
Okay, another question that's come. If everything is covered from person spec, including essential and desirable criteria in supporting information, does this automatically put you into being shortlisted?
So it does depend on the number of applications for the. So if you've met the essential criteria, and you have a disability, we are a disability confident leader employer. So there is there's something called the two ticks, well, what was called the two tick scheme. And if you tick that and you meet the essential criteria, you will be guaranteed an interview as part of that process. If you do not tick that, if say for instance we've had 100 applicants as part of that, and what we will then go to do is we will then go to shortlist based on essential and desirable criteria. So the issue will be is it depends on the role that you're applying for and the number of other people applying for. What you can ask for is, if your application is not successful, is that you can ask for feedback on it as part of it. Because what I'd say to you is that if you get an interview based on your application is tip top, you've done the right thing, you've got an interview, super duper, fantastic. If you've submitted your application and you're not tweaking it and you're just hitting click on every time you apply and you're not getting jobs, there's something that you need to tweak within the job description itself. And what I would say is that though that's the time to speak to learning and development specifically, because there's something that you need to tweak within there that's not reading right by any recruiting manager that's reading the application. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure if I've gone off a little bit off piece there.
I believe it does. If I get a feedback from the person who's posted it, I will ask further for further clarity. But for now, no comment.
Okay, is there any more questions?
You may proceed.
On
No
application.
question.
Thanks, Carol. So now this assumes that you've done a tip-top application and you've been invited to interview. So these are the sort of tips and techniques to make sure that you're before you even. So this is what you do before you even you get the invite to interview. This is the sort of things you should be thinking about. A bit of a checklist, so to speak. Read the invite to interview and making sure that you understand everything that's required as part of what they're asking you to do. Confirm your attendance, and often that will be directly through Track, so you'll be booking yourself into a slot available on the time. And this is where you contact the manager again to say, thank you very much for shortlisting me. And it goes back to the question that was previously asked. Can I just ask if you have any questions about the invite to interview and it's not contained within the interview letter, these are the sort of times to prep some questions for the manager, like, will there be an induction around the team as part of that, or can I arrange one prior to coming to interview? Will there be any forms of assessment? Is there anything specifically you would like me to look at as part of the interview process, or as part of the interview? Are there any key things you'd like to talk to me about it? Test the route if you're traveling. A lot of this predates COVID a little bit, so a lot of times the interviews are held on Teams. And confirm, and just understanding, we've talked a little bit about the types of interviews and assessments, and then going back and rereading and the advert and supporting documentation so that you make sure that you understand what's happening there. The other thing to think about is to think of that's not on here, is to think about 4 key stories where you believe you've done an amazing job within previous roles, more likely to be in your most current, the more current and up to date they can be as part of it, where you've delivered well on a project, you've supported a patient well, and things have worked really well, or you've had a really challenging time, you had a difficult patient, but you learned to have such a lot as part of that process. Because what you can do is that if you've got to talk them out loud with someone about what examples you're going to use, the sort of questions that you're going to get asked about, like nursing jobs, there'll be something about patient care, how have you demonstrated good patient care, and how you then articulate that out there. the great thing about those things is if you're choosing examples that you're really proud of, or you feel you've learned lots with, the more authentic you will come across at interview. And if you've practiced talking them out loud, you'll be comfortable talking to them with the recruiting panel, because often you can get a little bit intimidated talking to them as part of it. So rereading the supporting information, and there is a really good TikToker. I'm just going to see if I can play this as part of the training. So Alice, this and if this works, brilliant. If it doesn't, you can have a look at the link going forward. But this is just a really good how to write a.
Oh, you're gonna put that you worked retail on your resume? Did you fold clothes? Or did you maintain a clean and organized inventory and curated displays of rotating seasonal clothing and accessories? Did you help customers out? Or did you anticipate customer needs by providing them with the highest quality of service while upholding brand standards? Did you help with the fitting room? Or did you happily guide customers through the process of successfully finding their ideal styles and sizes? Did you manage the cashier? Or did you meticulously handle POS system transactions, including credit, cash, refunds, returns, and exchanges? Did you tell customers about sales? Or did you actively stay informed about all the latest sales offerings and loyalty programs? Follow for more. Oh, you're going to put.
So it's just to say that that is a really good example about how you can how you change the stories about some of these things. So you can that's a TikToker, but that's about retail, but she does other ones about different jobs, about what you're applying for. But it's just about how you frame some of the way you talk about some of your questions, if that makes sense. Is there any question,
Andrew?
Yep.
If is it at this stage, if I have any disability needs, I email the employer, or it is too early to disclose that I have a disability?
So it depends on the nature of the disability as part of it. You are asked to disclose that as part of the application process. You will be asked whether there's any reasonable adjustments that are needed as part of the interview process. So reasonable adjustments to interview process in someone who is deaf could ask for an interpreter. If there is a written assessment for someone who is partially sighted, you could ask for some additional equipment so that you could undertake the same level of assessment. If you are, I know that one of the big things is that if you have Asperger's or anxiety type disorders that are categorized as disabilities under the Equality Act, you can ask for the interview questions in advance. Now, the manager may decline to give you the interview questions because some of interviews are supposed to assess whether you can, how you respond under pressure, so to speak. But what they can give you is some generic themes about what they're talking about. So it depends. It does depend on the nature of the disability, and or if you're in a wheelchair, making sure that they have access to the right kinds of things. So it does depend on. You do not need to disclose it at this point in time. If you require any reasonable adjustment as part of it, yes, you should disclose that and then be articulating to the manager as part of it. I, as a dyslexic person, would ask for 25% more time in doing any written based assessments and making sure that I have access to a spell checker if spelling's going to be assessed, because my spelling's atrocious, so to speak. Is that answer the question?
Thank you very much. You can proceed.
Cool. And then watching that video, that some really interesting content that TikToker has. The other thing is dressing to impress, appropriate clothing. My boss told me to dress for the job I want, not the job you have. I'm now sitting in his disciplinary hearing dressed as Batman. What I'd say to you is do not dress comfortably with what you feel empowered in. If you're going to wear something that makes you feel uncomfortable, you will do body language tells. You'll start, if it's too tight, you'll start pulling it down. You do the weirdest body language in interviews. So what I would suggest to do is pick your outfit in advance and make sure it's something that makes you feel super duper confident. Don't buy something new and just put it on. You may have a go-to suit or a go-to dress or a go-to whatever. That's the thing to wear at interview. As long as it looks professional and you feel amazing and confident in it, wear it. The things that stories I've heard about dressing at the interview is I saw someone came to interview with a Bugs Bunny tie, and as an interviewer that detracted from you as a person, them as a person, because all I was concentrating on is that, oh, they've got a Bugs Bunny tie on. So you don't want to wear something that's going to be too out there, because they want to focus on you as the person, not on what you're wearing, if that makes sense. I had a story told to me that someone came dressed in a corset, and it just detracted from the whole interview, because all they were doing was fidgeting and moving around and trying to get it comfortable. And what you, as I say, you dress to impress, but you just make sure that you're comfortable and it is appropriate for the setting that you're applying. If you're applying for because casual wear can be appropriate, but also smart, and I would always try and go smarter than you think the job requires, because you can always dress you can always, it's harder to make a second first impression, so to speak. Any questions about dressing, Carol?
In view that there is a lot of economic disparities, and some people might be homeless and they've just had an opportunity of an interview, would they be discriminated against if they wore something that was maybe not considered as appropriate, but that's all they had?
No, but I know that there are lots of charities out there that offer support to people going for job interviews if they're homeless, or provide that level of support. So I know that there's one in Kettering, and I'll try and find the contact details. But you wouldn't necessarily get discriminated against, because it's more about who you are and what you said. It's just, I'm talking about here about how you make yourself stand out from the crowd and how you put yourself above other candidates. So it would be then tipping yourself into that next point about it. But I will try and find the contact details for those people with economic issues, because there are some really good charities and support there for people where they can get access to clothes that for job interviews specifically.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Most people have been given information they were not aware of. We've got a last question, then you may proceed after answering. Yep. If you're attending interview while at work, does wearing your uniform affect your interview outcome?
No, in fact, uniform is often better to wear, because that's very professional. That's how you're being perceived at work. Um, it's whether you feel comfortable in that. What I'd say to you is that if you feel comfortable in your uniform, that's the thing to wear. It won't, if anything, if you've not got anything to think about, if you're not sure about what to wear, a uniform is often a really, in nursing roles and clinical roles specifically, whether you have to wear a uniform as part of the role, and you're coming to interview internally as part of that, then yes, uniform is perfectly acceptable. Am I right to proceed, Carol?
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you. So, questions being asked at interview. So, what's great about you? I'm nice. A lot of people will clam up and give very short, sharp answers. This is about looking about to expand them a little bit, so that you're giving the best possible presentation at interview. So what I'd say is listen to the question being asked, and thinking about those 4 examples, or 4 to 5 examples of those stories that we thought about, and thinking which one of those stories would best answer these questions. Take your time to reply. you will think that you're taking absolute ages in responding. Count to 3, take a deep breath. Breathing is one of these things that you've, well, I think before we even get to the questions, it's about breathing. One of the most simple things you can do before your interview is just take some simple box breathing, which is 4 breaths in. So you take your breath in 1, 2, 3, 4, you hold for 4, counting for 4, and then you breathe out for 4, and then you hold for 4. So it's called box breathing because you go in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, in for 4. And what that does is it just calms your heart rate down, slows you down, helps you take, and breathing is one of these things that it's natural, but when you're anxious, you'll start to hold your breath, you start to clam up a little bit, and that's why it's important to count to 3 and actually breathe. The other thing is answer the question asked, not the question, not either repeating the question and then answering what you think it is, but are you answering the question? So what are your strengths and weaknesses? So what are your strengths and weaknesses? Or going off and doing a totally irrelevant story that's got nothing to do with what's being asked as part of it. A great way to check on this is that at the end of it is, does that answer the question? And I've done that quite a lot on this presentation here, but you can check in with the interview panel, and if they are giving non-verbal clue, you can get interview panels that just sit there very stony faced. The more equal the interview, the more stony faced they are, and they don't give any responses to what you're doing. That's a really difficult interview to be in. Where they're giving like sort of subtle hints and clues and prompting you as part of that, that's where I would say you can ask those sort of questions, and there's nothing stopping you answering it, but what they may say is that, well, it's up to you. They may go back and say, well, you've answered based on what you've said, so we're not going to repeat it as part of it. And there is a sort of model in the way that you can answer questions. So when you're thinking about your stories, think about the situation that you were in, the context, the who and the why. Think about the task that was at hand. What did you do? And I mean, what did you do specifically? Not what the team did, not what anyone else did. What did you do? Action. What did you do as a result? How did you do it? And then the result. So what was the impact based on that what you, the situation, the task and the action? So the situation was that you had a deteriorating patient. The task is that you identified that there was an issue. The action was that you escalated it appropriately. You made sure that the patient's family were informed, and as a result, the patient received the best possible care that they received. That's a very generic, specific, but that's sort of how you frame it. And then there's something about result / impact. You can add an I to star in terms of, and how did that make you feel as a professional? That often gives them, you know, a bit, it makes it a bit more authentic in terms of what we're doing. And are there any questions about questions, Carol?
But first question is, if I am talking in the context of myself in an interview, what you did, how you did it, and what were the results? Is that not showcasing a self-centered approach in a team that's working in a ward or in a department?
Part of interviews, unfortunately, is that they are about you. They're not about the team that you were working in. So you do need to highlight what you did. You can instead say, I worked as part of a team. My specific role in the team was to do this, so that you are acknowledging the team, but you're also saying what role you played as part of the team. Because what the interviewer won't understand in the way that you say it is that we as a team identified there was a deteriorating patient. We as a team identified that what to do. We as a team did all the actions as part of it, and the team got a good result and the patient was there. It's just about how did you hear what I just said there compared to what I said before. It's about actually the interviewer won't understand what role you played within the situation. It's not about putting yourself trying to aggrandize who you are and what you're doing. It's just so the interviewer understands how you fitted within the team. Because if you just talk about we did this and we did that and the team did this and the team did that, the interviewer gets no sense about what you did within that team setting. So it's really important to try and, if you feel uncomfortable saying I did this and I did that, it's about thinking about the story that you're telling to them. Say the team that did this and I played a role within the team doing this. So you're not compromising who you are, but you're also giving the interviewer who you are within a team.
I've got 3 questions. The first one, what if you have no answer for what is asked? What's next? How would you tackle that in a smart way?
Oh, the first thing is that take to 3. You can get them to re-ask the question, because sometimes under pressure you don't actually and you can ask them, could you rephrase the question, as I'm not sure I understand, um, or those are the sorts of questions I'd ask back as part of it. And if they then say no, or if they ask it again and you don't understand, I would be honest as part of it and say, I'm really sorry. That's something that I don't understand. I don't actually know anything about myself, but I'd be happy to learn or know a bit about, or this is what I think you mean. Um, and this is my experience as part of it. Or is there anything I'm not sure I know exactly how to respond to that. And dependent on the interview panel that you get, you may get responses back, or they may just be quite not willing to, because they're trying to be fair and consistent to all candidates, so they may not prompt in that way. But that's how I would handle it, to try and ask a question back to say, can you reframe it? I don't quite understand the question, could you ask it in a different way, or something along those lines.
So is it the same response if they give me a situation which I've never experienced?
Well, what I'd say is that you be honest about it. The best thing about interviews is being authentic. So I've never experienced that personally, but what I would do what I would do based on that situation is this. So, and then talk it through star model in terms of, in theory I'd do this, but then if you can then relate it back to, and I've sort of done that when I did this, or so I had a similar situation, but it's not exactly the same, and this is, and then try and relate it back. But with that context, it's hard for me to say without specific examples, Carol, but it's just trying to say that you try and tweak your response, and try and think of one of those 4 stories that you think that could best fit it, and then trying to then say, right, well, if I talk about this experience, I've not experienced this, but I'm going to talk about this experience because I think it relates to the question that you're asking in this way. That's probably the best way to feel comfortable about talking about it. But it's just the question about, do you feel that you answer the question after you've answered it? But I can't say without saying a specific example. But
And
talking
then,
in theory, that's how I'd handle it.
and then the next question, what is a good way to answer a question about weaknesses without sounding bad?
My favorite answer to this, and it's a bad answer, so don't use it, is my biggest weakness is I'm a perfectionist. That's the one I talk to all the time, because actually what I'd say to you is that your biggest weakness is, what they're trying to understand from you is, where do you think your areas of development are, or where do you struggle? What I would be prepared to do as part of that is that, in your heart of hearts where you struggle with something, or you don't like doing it, but then what you then do is have an example prepared of where you do something you don't like doing or you feel uncomfortable with. So you can then say to them, my biggest weakness is this, but how I address that is this. So that what you're doing is, the situation is the weakness, the task is, what I do to address my weakness. The action is how do I go about doing it, and how your result is that how have you developed as a practitioner or as an individual based on how you address your weakness. So you turn it into a positive. You don't see it as they're just asking me where, you know, they're singling me out here. This is about how you demonstrate emotional intelligence about the job or yourself, so you know something about you, and this is how you deal with it, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm going to read the last question. How do you answer questions about clinical governance or other situations where you have no experience? And then the person is gone further to just outline to you, Andrew, that but striving for perfection is not a weakness.
I'm striving perfection is not a weakness. I do get that. It's just about saying that as the response to a weakness question is not what the interviewer wants to hear. They they want to hear, well, if perfectionism is a weakness, you say I'm a perfectionist, but actually I understand that I can't achieve perfection all the time, and then it's about how I then say, what do I do to address my perfectionism? So what I will do is I will get it to the point that I feel it's doable, and then I have to let it go, and that's been difficult for me. But what I found is that this has really helped me in terms of my profession, because otherwise it creates some conflict within myself. So
So
what I would say to
we need a question answering. How do you answer questions about clinical governance or other situations where you have no experience? And then after answering, you can proceed.
Okay, so clinical governance, what I would say is that if you've got no experience in that area, I would Google it and read up about it. Or clinical governance, there's a great governance team within KGH. I would actually go and have a conversation with them directly, because you should have a governance manager within your division or team. And actually it's just saying, can you give me a little bit about what I should be doing as part of my own governance? Governance is basically about holding yourself to account for things and making sure that you're raising datexes when things go wrong, and you're resolving things and you're escalating things in the right way, and making sure that you're reporting things appropriately. And it is a lot of the time you're actually doing it as part of the job that you're doing, but you don't realize that you're doing it. So it's just understanding, and then asking the question of the governance manager to say, how can I do that? But this is perfect because also learning and development are there to answer those questions, and
But
they do training on clinical governance. They can ask you specific, if you want to be asked specific questions and to give you support with answering specific, they can also be talked about in terms of preparing these responses.
But if I'm asked these questions at an interview and I'm not prepared, so this is a scenario where I've just got to the interview and I hadn't read up on governance. So I asked a clinical governance question is asked, and the situation they give me, I have no experience with. How do I manage that to still be able to do well in the interview?
So I would say to the interviewer, I practice, well, it's getting a little bit more clarity from them to then say, I'm not sure I have any what I would consider direct experience with clinical governance at the level required, but what I would see is that that's a development element for the role that I'd be going into. I and then go into what you think are the principles of whatever they're asking you. So if it's about governance, if it's about confidentiality, there will be some standard questions that they ask about, you know, customer service or patient experience or confidentiality or um, governance. And when I say governance, is how do you hold yourself account to your practice that you undertake? Those are the sorts of questions that, you know, when I ask an HR interview, I always ask about confidentiality. I always ask about um, customer service experience. I always ask about these sorts of things. And if you've done an interview before, you should know sort of what's going to be asked of you. And if not, you should get some sense of it from the job description on the person specification, because if they're asking you something that's not on the personal specification, I'd be a bit like, why are you asking me this? So I would, that's how I would handle it, Carol.
Well,
Some of it is about
just
being
for
a bit more
clarity, are you saying that we can ask the employer, the interviewing panel, why are you asking me this? Just for clarity, because you've just made that statement.
I'd say that what I'd say is that if you are assured that you have read all the interview notes, the job description, the interview, the application, and there's nothing about what's being asked in terms of that, and it's completely left field, and you don't understand why it's being asked, just say, could you give me a little bit more context around why you're asking this question so that I can see how I can apply this to my previous experience? Not asking a direct because if you asked, why are you asking me this, that may set the panel off, that's a conflicting question.
I believe you might ask this in your next slides. Can I ask the panel questions, and what kind of questions are best to ask?
Okay, that's coming up later, so I'll answer those a bit later, if that's so. I'll answer that question. It's a really good question. I'll answer it later. So the next one is body language and the power of presence of fake it till you make it. So I'm not going to show you this video, but I would recommend that each and every one of you go away and look at it following this session, because it's 20 minutes worth of a video. Amy Cuddy is a professor at Harvard University, and she talks about the power of body language within and social cues within high stress situations like interviews. She did a scientific experiment with regards to how you use body language to influence how you feel going into high pressure situations like videos. And what she talks about is body language, the power of presence, and the faking it till you make it. So what I mean there is that the typical response before you go into an interview is that you will make yourself smaller. This and this is a human response to things, and it's more likely to happen in women than men, in terms of making yourself feel smaller, touching your face, reassuring yourself, because as part of that, what the video shows you is that actually you need to do the exact opposite before you go into the interview. This is about the bit of talking to yourself, and what I would say is that they talk about the Wonder Woman pose, where you put your stand with your arms on your hips, or you put your hands over behind your head, you lean back and you spread your legs up as wide as possible. Now, these are what is termed as alpha male poses, but what that does within the body is it releases certain chemicals that actually trigger your body to think you're more confident than you actually are. So the idea being is that before you go into an interview, like just a bit before going to the toilet, it's talking to yourself to say, I'm amazing, I'm brilliant, and you stand as big as you possibly can in order to trick your body into releasing the chemicals to make you feel more confident than you actually are. So it's a great video, and she also talks about her personal experience, about how she faked it till she became it as part of it. And actually, power of presence does help, this is a hack, so to speak, to get you more confident as you go into any high pressure situation, but particularly those of interviews as part of it. So I would normally, as part of the session, if it was a bit longer, watch all of that video. It is a very inspiring video from my perspective, and because the Usain Bolt pose is a pride pose, and that is blind people do that when they're celebrating, and they don't know why. So some of this is about understanding it's the using your body and using yourself to get yourself a bit more confident as part of it. Any questions on the power of presence and body language? The only thing I would say is do not do the alpha male pose sitting in interview. Don't do it in the interview. It's meant to be done before the interview. You could get some weird looks if you start spreading your legs wide and putting your hands behind your head actually at the interview table. Is that all right, Carol? Is that
we've understood? Fake it till you make it. In other terms, you're saying we should pretend we've made it, even if we're still at the start of a process.
yes, because the interview is all about actually, I am good enough to do the job that you're asking me to do. Because what Amy Cuddy talks about is fake it till you make it, but actually fake it till you become it. Because with any job that you do, it will take 6 months to get experience, the knowledge, the understanding to actually do it. But you've got to pretend like you know what you're doing in before you actually know what you're doing. It's that's with any situations. You don't know what's going on in other people's heads, but 9 times out of 10, they'll think, "Oh, I shouldn't be here either." But it is having that level of confidence to put yourself above the parapet to make sure that you can present yourself in a way that it stands you out at interview.
Thank you very much. You can proceed.
Now,
sorry, another question's just come.
okay.
Does an attentive look give a look of worry? Do frowning that appear with thinking give a worried look? What about smiling? I think it's just being understanding that we come from very different, diverse cultures, and some expressions are part of thinking, thought line, a positive expression that could be perceived wrongly. So they're just asking round various expressions.
I think my experience of interviews is about well, what they talk about is that there's something called mirroring. So if you've got rapport with your the panel that you're looking at, you can cross your arms and you can look at see if they cross their arms, or you could put your arms on your legs. If you feel you've got what you can do is if you're feeling really comfortable and you feel, oh, this is working really well, you can test that by changing some of your body language and seeing if they copy you. And if they have rapport with you, sometimes they will copy you back. It's called mirroring as a technique. And what I'd say to you is that if you feel that you've been told that you why are you frowning as part of that, and you say, well, actually I'm thinking, it may be that you need to explain that to the interview panel to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking. So, and then smiling is always nice. Smiling is a good gesture, and often what you'll do is you'll see people, if you smile at someone, mirroring is about whether they smile back at you to see if you've got rapport and they're engaging with you. So that's a good way to test some body language techniques, but I don't necessarily think that will give you an indication about how well you're doing at interview, if that makes sense.
So if I struggle with eye contact because I come from a place where a culture where we don't look at people direct in their eyes, does it mean I have to prepare before the interview?
What I'd say is that there's some weird and wonderful techniques. If you're embarrassed by people, people say to imagine them naked, and sometimes I'm like, I don't want to imagine the interview panel naked. The other one is to pick a position behind them, a focus point behind the interview panel as part of it, and then look at them. What I would try and do is direct your attention to the person that's asked the question. So if you can engage with the person and eye contact, it's good to have eye contact going forward. But if you're uncomfortable maintaining eye contact, it's about trying to pick somewhere in the room where you feel comfortable looking at that looks like they're looking at them, but you're not, or you're looking at something behind them that's actually makes it look like you're looking at them, if that makes sense, so that it helps you engage with keeping eye contact when you're not actually maintaining eye contact. Is that helpful at all?
I think we will not promote imagining the the interview.
Yeah.
Yes,
No, that may get into other HR issues. So I
thank
apologise
you.
profusely
But
for
the
mentioning
other
that.
are really great ideas. Thank you very much.
So this is something that we can't really do on Teams, unfortunately. But what I would suggest to do is to take this exercise and try it with a colleague or at home as part of it, or you can even contact staff development if you need more helps with interview skills. But this is a valued based interview question, which is slightly because there's different types of interview question. There's competency based interview questions, which is testing your knowledge. There's aptitude questions, which test your ability to do something, and then this is valued based. So what this means is that this is about testing the authentic you as part of this. And I've had some really weird responses to these sort of questions. I've had people cry on me for asking these sort of questions. So what I'd say to you is that you can practice this at home, and actually people crying on the interview has had a really positive effect if it's done in the right way and it's been done about something that's authentic and meant really, really much to someone. You can see how passionate they are about something. So don't be this is quite a powerful interview technique, and don't be afraid of the responses, but as long as it's authentic. Because if you're not authentic and you're crying to promote yourself, if it comes out naturally, brilliant. If it doesn't, don't force it, because this is all about being authentic. So what we would ask generally in value based is, can you tell me about a time when you showed you were, and then pick one of the values as part of it. And then so can you tell me about a time when you showed me you were compassionate? And then I didn't know, Carol, do you feel comfortable me asking you these questions at all, just as an example?
Yes, I'm okay. I'm comfortable.
So which value would you like me to ask you about?
Um, Respect.
Okay. Can you tell me about a time when you showed you were respectful?
I was very upset with my manager, and unfortunately, it so happens to be you, Andrew. And I was going to respond in not a really nice way because I was quite emotional, and I asked if I could have time away, even if I was required to make a decision in regards the issue at that point. And I outlined that at that precise moment I was upset, and I wanted to still be able to respect him as my leader and my manager. So I needed time to reflect on the best approach and reflect on why I was so upset so that I could let go and be able to progress forward.
How did that make you feel?
When he accepted that, yes, we would resume the meeting the following day, I felt respected back because he understood why I was upset and where I was coming from, because the issue at hand was impacting me because I had historically been bullied and harassed myself, and it's just touched a nerve.
And what did you learn as a result?
I learned that sometimes for me to be able to showcase respect in a work environment, I have to be courageous enough to outline that I'm not in a good place and it's okay to not be okay, and ask to come back to a discussion when I'm in a better place so that I'm still able to showcase respect.
Um, okay, brilliant. So thank you very much, Carol. I do appreciate the being able to be asked that question at this part of thing. So what I would say to you is that if you notice that some of this is that it can be very personal, these values, and what I would say to you is that the more personal and the more detail you can get, the more you can get a sense of the individual. So I knowing Carol and working with Carol, we have worked through that example together previously. But what I'd say is that what did you get listening to that example? So what did you learn about Carol based on what she said, and how she responded as part of that? So what I would say as an interviewer, what I would learn is that she's taken the respectful value, she's interpreted it in a way that means that she then uses, she knows that she can get angry and emotional based on a response, but she's learnt to actually consider that, consider the approach, and then is able to then and has reflected on it, so shows emotional intelligence about the way she acts and works within a role as part of that. So as a recruiter, you can then get that insight into the individual. So it's basically, these questions can go in weird and wonderful ways in terms of those kind of things, and it depends on what you want to say to them. But it's also about thinking about those 4 examples that we talked about before. One of them could relate to one of these things, but it's the question about how did that make you feel and what did you learn as a result, are 2 quite interesting questions, and can provoke some quite emotional responses from people. So a big thank you again for me, Carol, for being so open and transparent with that. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Are there any questions about interview questions and value-based interviewing? Silence is golden, so I'm assuming there's no response. You can contact staff development if you need more help with interview skills and application forms in general. So please don't see this as like the end all of this sort of stuff. Staff development do a lot of this sort of training with people, and they have got a lot more resources as part of it as well. So and we want people to be promoted internally, because it shows that we're developing our own staff, and staff development are very keen to make sure that that's happening, and no question about this sort of stuff is a stupid question. So at the end of the interview, we talked about this one. This goes back to the question that Carol raised before. Think about the questions you can ask the panel as a way of making a closing statement about why you want the job. So this relates to, what are the kinds of questions do I ask at the end of the interview? Now, I would make sure that you're not asking anything around the job itself, because you should have covered that by looking at the job description or the personal specification in the advert. And hopefully you've picked that up as part of any informal discussions with the manager, even before making the application or coming to interview as part of it. There's something about knowing what you want to know. So the other questions about if you haven't, some of these may get asked at interview in terms of um, um, what do you see as the development for the team that I'm going into? Um, how do you what are the team's priorities within the next 6 months? And it's just ask, and what do you think about working with, how if the team were to ask you about what it's like working for you, what would they say, what do you think they'd say about you, kind of thing, if you want to know those sorts of questions. The other framing way is to then say about I just want to, I've read it, it's just reaffirming or telling a story, to then say telling the story that you've been through. So I just wanted to say that following our conversation at the application stage, I was really excited to make an application for this job, and I was really pleased to be interviewed as part of it. And based on our conversations that we had about the interview, and thank you for showing me around the department, I really do appreciate it as part of that. I think I'd be a really good fit for this team based on the fact that I can demonstrate this, and this, trying to frame what you've said in the interview, and then saying is that, and I hope that you see that I could be a really an asset to the team and the work that I do going forward. And some of that will take practice. So what I do is, if you're looking to do something like that, is you need to practice that a little bit. So adding to your stories to try and it's almost telling a story of your interview process that you've just been through, and trying to recall as part of it. And the more you can link that into, the better, really, with regards to that. And just saying about why you want the job at the end of it. Now, Carol, does that answer the question of what should I ask at the end of the interview? The other one is that if they don't, the one that I would expect them to tell you is, when should I hear about the outcome of the interview? And I would expect them to contact you directly as part of that, to then say, when should I hear about whether I've got the job or not?
Thank you very
much. But please, 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 interviews are two-way processes. You have power in this process. Interviews are two-way processes. And what I would say to you at the end of it is, do you still want the job at the end of the interview? Because you may come away from that and go, and every interview that I've been in, and I've been to quite a lot, I can probably tell you the ones that I thought I wasn't going to get and the ones I thought I was going to get. And I could tell you the reasons why I didn't get the job if I reflect back properly on what I'd done as part of it. And if I've got no understanding as part of why I didn't get the job, I will ask for feedback. But what I'd say to you is, don't ask for feedback at the point in time that you're told that you don't get the job, because what you'll find is that you're quite I always find I'm a bit like a rabbit in the headlights. I don't necessarily I don't think I'm ready to hear the feedback. I need to process the fact that I haven't got the job before I can understand why they haven't given me the job, because I can get quite defensive over, well, I could demonstrate that as part of it. And unfortunately, at that point in time, you can't, they're saying that you haven't got the job. So actually you'd need to, you're trying to be as objective as possible as part of that. So that's just a tip. If you're trying to get feedback, just take the point that you don't get, you've heard about not getting the job, and try and get the feedback at a later date when you're not. I need time to process before I understand a little bit more detail about why you hadn't given me the job. If you're comfortable about it, but please feel free to do that. But it's just a tip that I would probably suggest. Are there any questions about that, Carol?
None that have been posted.
Okay. So going back to the aim of this session is to know where to apply for NHS and KGH jobs, give you confidence to apply for a job, give you tips on how to make your application stand out, give you the confidence to be interviewed, and give you some tips on how to make the best impression at interview. So hopefully I've covered that. What I'll do now is any questions, but I am rooting for you as part of your next vacancy. But what I'll do now is I'll take down the presentation and look to answer questions as part of that. Okay.
Mustafa said, really appreciate all this help. Thank you for providing this opportunity, organizers. Thank you to the Rich EDI Network as well for helping in helping us organize this. Thanks, Andrew. This was great and I really enjoyed it. That's from Jake. And then Shri, one of our Rich EDI coaches. Thank you very much, Andrew. It really is valuable information. I missed a few bits between due to some phone calls, but I will go through the video again. Thank you again for your time and effort. Thank you, Shri, and the EDI coaches for Rich who helped organize this as well. Gigi says, thanks a lot. Lana, some very useful tips. We'll look at using these ideas in the future. William says, thank you very much, Andrew. It was quite enlightening. And then Nimatula says, thanks a lot, really great. So on an overall, Andrew, thank you for doing this presentation. And I believe it's going to be available for everybody, those who've not been able to attend and those who are within the organization. Will you be sharing it publicly through comms? A question to you, Andrew.
So we are doing some work. It's International HR Day on the 20th of May, and I'm working with Sheila because there's some other content that's going to come out from NHS England, and Sheila's been working on some other stuff. So what we're trying to do is put it all into like a learning package and make sure that it's available via Alice is probably the best person to speak to about where that will land as part of it. But there's some stuff that will come out about but a lot of the stuff will be on learning within staff development and learning development's content. So I would expect that they would be hosted somewhere, so they've got that. What I will do is as soon as I'm just trying to share the content, share the presentation within the chat right now so you can have it.
Okay, someone said one of the feedback I got was a scoring system that I did not manage to get enough marks. So no matter how good you are, if you do not get the score, you never get the job. Any insight on it? And
So,
also another question to answer after that. If I'm not happy and it's an internal post within our organization, how do I get valuable feedback, not vague feedback? And how can I contest it if I am not happy? So 3 questions that I've just asked.
cool, they're right. Okay. So first one is scoring systems. So in terms of that, usually what we have is a scoring system out of 4. One being that you didn't answer the question, or you answered the question but it totally didn't hit the mark. 2 being that you answered the question but it didn't really hit the mark. You answered some of the question but it didn't meet the example. 3, you answered the question. 4, you answered the question and went above and beyond as part of that. So it's normally scored, and 0, you didn't even attempt it as part of the process as part of that. So what then will the interview panel will do is have a discussion based on those scoring criteria and come up with a score at the end based on what's happened, and that will happen for each individual candidate going forward. Now HR maintain a record of that, so we would say that what would happen is that you would have scoring criteria against them. What you have is a benchmark that they set around who is appointable above the score that depends on how many questions, the assessments, weighting of questions. They will then say this is the scoring. This is the scoring that I had as part of that, and then it's about and then there'll be a threshold about what's appointable based on the score, and then there will be the person who has scored the highest. So what I would say to you is that we, as an organisation, will be pick the best candidate for the job, which is often the person who scored the highest. So if you want to contest that as part of that, its understanding is that how can I understand how many other candidates and how I scored in comparison to those other candidates, and what was the threshold for what was the threshold for appointable scores? Because often, sometimes you can be appointable, but unfortunately you were pipped to the post by another candidate who scored better on the day. And unfortunately, that's some of the issues with interviews. Sometimes the interview doesn't actually demonstrate how well you could do the job, but it is the only form of assessment that we have in order to do that, and it is quite an established, understood process as part of application, interview, and then recruitment checks as part of that process. So in terms of contesting it, you would then need to escalate that through to the recruitment team leader, and then potentially the resourcing manager, to then so that then they could give you some feedback on the scores specifically. What we would say is that HR, unfortunately, aren't the people who score you. It is the manager that scores you. So it'd be a combination between HR giving you the feedback and the manager. We'd only be able to provide the scoring. The manager would be able to give the specific context. But what I find often the hardest piece is that to say, unfortunately, you were appointable, but you weren't the best scoring candidate on the day, and as a recruiting manager, that's often the hardest feedback to get, to say you were good, but unfortunately you weren't. There was someone else that was better. Does that answer the question?
Thank you very much.
But they're really good questions, and often what I find is that sometimes you can be quite emotional when you get a negative. I get quite defensive in terms of, I wanted this job, I should have got this job as part of it. You are all amazing, and what I'd say to you is that I'm a bit fatalistic with these sort of things, is that everything happens for a reason, and if you don't get that job, I would use that to spur you on to get that next job as part of it. And what I'd also say is that the NHS is a large entity, and looking beyond KGH. Whilst we want you to stay within KGH and provoke the opportunities, often people look, right, well, I want to stay in this ward, I want to be promoted to that supervisor role within that ward, and then I want to be the ward manager in that role. Actually, you need to look a little bit broader and wider to try and people are like boomerangs at KGH. What they find is that they go away and then they come get more experience and then come back to working here. So it's just making sure that you're not limiting yourself because you have the potential to get that next promotion. And it applications and interviews are numbers games. The more applications you make, the more likely you are to get an interview. The more interviews you go to, the more likely you are to get a new job. So it can be a bit soul destroying going for this process, but what I would encourage you to do is just keep going and keep pushing and keep promoting yourself, because you will get there. You are determined. You have the ability to do it, and this is about trying to give you the confidence and the willpower to go, I can get that next job, I will get that next job, and I won't be put off by the application process next time, or I won't be put off by going for interview, because I'm always a big believer is that we'll go to the interview and it only becomes a problem if you get offered the job. And I often find that's the nicest way to do it, to say I'm going for experience, I'm going to improve my interview experience, I'm going to improve my application experience, I'm not doing it to apply for the job, and then it's just a nice consequence that I actually get the job at the end of it, if that makes sense. But those are the sort of things that I would be don't be put off by interviews, don't be put off by applications. It's just a process at the end of the day.
The last question before you close. If I feel that I've been discriminated or there was very direct biases towards me, who do I contact?
Sorry, I just muted myself. So we have the EDI team here who can support you through that process. You can actually make an application to the recruitment manager to look at that through HR as part of that process. And there's also freedom to speak up. So there are a number of ways that you can do it as part of that process. But I think that the EDI, I've seen the best results for in terms of resolution through getting support from EDI and HR together, working together to get the resolution. So because we have had some of those cases, and what we will do is we will investigate that thoroughly and make sure that the scoring is correct. And I think that in those sort of instances, we do need to know about them, because it's also about how we improve the process, because as HR professionals and managers, we don't get it right all the time. And our EDI journey is a continual learning journey that we're going on. And if we're not getting it right, we need to get it right in the future and make sure that we're supporting people to do that. I'd encourage people to speak up wherever possible if they have those concerns. But it's just understanding the process that it goes through as part of this, and the scoring system, because that would be where I would get the evidence based as part of that, and I'd need to understand a little bit more detail around if there are some discrimination claims, because you are protected under the Equality Act around some of those elements, and it's just making sure that we investigate and make sure that we resolve it to satisfaction. Unfortunately, with some of these things, if you don't get the job, that is what you ultimately want with regards to that. And some of that is that some of that is that if that I want to make sure that there's no discrimination based on protected characteristics within the recruitment process at all. But there's something about where you felt that discrimination came from and how we can support you to articulate that. I'm not sure I've answered that question, Carol, but I've tried as best I can. Have a lovely day, and I wish you very well with all your future applications, guys. I've got my fingers crossed. I'll say goodbye now. Bye-bye.